Добрый вечер.
Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much that for not so early moment you could find a possibility to come and to attend this side event, which is really towards the main venue, can be called the side event, directly speaking, the first meeting. For sure, during this forum, we could hear a lot about Russia, and also in the margin of the forum, and also in the media. That's why we come on here the panel in the modest way, the leading, the eminent speakers, people who influence and who decide the policy and the axis of development of our country. When we are speaking about the climate changes, global warming, and for other number of issues. That's why I'd like firstly introduce our speakers to my right, Maxim Reshetnikov, the Minister of Economic Development of the Russian Federation, Alexey Lykachev, Director General of the State Atomic Corporation Rosatom, and to my left, Vyacheslav Solomin, Sergei and Priyanka, and also Mr. German Gref should join us on online mode, the CEO and the President of the Executive Board of Russian Sberbank. We think that we made a good mixture of speakers who will allow us speaking the climate problems, how we resolve them in the Russian Federation, on behalf of the government, the state, and also from the business point of view. What is very important. In Russia, we feel the climate changes, and we already spoke about this during our national remark, and we feel a lot of negative changes that we see personally ourselves, and despite the fact that Russia is a northern country and it should get a chance, but speaking about the further future and perspective, we see new coming problems, and even today we see the flooding growing, the forest fires, we see the desert spread, and we spoke a lot during this forum, and everybody is asking about permafrost, which makes around 70% of our territory and includes big reserves of greenhouse gases, which can go outside in case if this permafrost disappears. And there is another very big danger that majority of our territory will suffer from erosion processes, and also our infrastructure will suffer from these negative processes, and also our cities which are located there. All of these factors have impact on the life of the people. That's why Russia, firstly, and ourselves, we try to resolve all these problems. And here we take really major efforts in this sphere. And we asked Maxim Reshetnikov to speak about the efforts taken by the government of the Russian Federation in order to resolve the climate problems and the global warming. Some of us will make presentations in the English language, another in the Russian language, in order to share democratic ambience here. Thank you.
Use English to be more frank, predictable, understandable for our foreign guests. Russia has historically been an active player in the international climate process. Russia is a global leader in terms of accumulated emissions reductions and real emissions reductions since 1990. We will continue to be consistent in our efforts and call for a pragmatic dialogue on the tools to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. It means for us that we should look for the most effective ways to reduce emissions and make low carbon development a source of growth and diversification of economies instead of an obstacle to them. I will briefly introduce our priorities at COP26. Firstly, we advocate for the principles of technological neutrality. It means that we should not discriminate against any emissions reductions based on such low emission technologies as, for example, nuclear and hydropower. If a technology, solution or project allows reducing net emissions, it should be recognized as a real reduction. Secondly, we strive for the mutual recognition and free circulation of carbon credits issued from the emission reduction and removal projects. It's crucial to count emission reduction and removals where it would be more profitable and more efficient to implement projects. What really mattered to tackling climate change are the real reduction and removals more than by whom and or how they were managed. Thirdly, we consider it reasonable to exempt emission reductions and removals projects from sanction and unilateral restrictions. There is no place for such sanctions in the world of fair competition, and even more so in such a vital issue as climate change. Finally, with regard to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, it's important to agree on the working mechanism under Article 6. We believe they should take into account the above-mentioned principles and the specifics of the forest projects. Removals are equally important to tackle climate change. This will help us to achieve the announced goals. I would like to stress the parties to the Paris Agreement do not need new goals. They need tools to achieve those already declared. Russia has set national emissions reduction goals for 2030 and 2050. The 2030 goal was included in the first national determined contribution of the Russian Federation. The 2050 goal was incorporated in the 2050 low emissions development strategy. When formulating the strategy, we also assessed the opportunities and expected outcomes of setting a carbon neutrality goal. What we are doing in practice. We are implementing the National Plan for Climate Change Adaptation. Now, more detailed sectoral adaptation plans are under development. In July, we adopted the law on limited greenhouse gas emission. It lays the foundation for our climate regulation. What particular tools does this law provide? Firstly, it provides mandatory greenhouse gas emission reporting for large emitters and the framework for voluntary emissions reporting. Independent experts are those who are supposed to verify these reports. That's why the law enables the market for climate-related verification services. We expect to issue accreditation for the first validation and verification bodies later this month, but now we have news that the first verification and validation bodies were approved nowadays. They will be tasked with verifying greenhouse gas emission reports. We are also working to make Russian validation and verification bodies recognized on the international level. Secondly, the law introduced the system of voluntary emissions reductions projects and a carbon offset market. We see this regulation relevant in terms of mechanism under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. At the same time, we are looking into how other carbon regulation tools can be applied in Russia. For example, a cap-and-trade emission trading system, ETC. Our first regional ETS pilot in the Sakhalin region seeks to reach carbon neutrality by the end of 2026 and is almost ready to be launched. In particular, we are now finalizing our detailed action plan and discussing the methodology for quota allocation with businesses and experts. Russia has enormous potential for zero and low emissions power generation and certification. Our green electricity certificate plans would allow companies to achieve verified reduction of their carbon footprint. The government adopted the national taxonomy of green projects, which includes both the green and transitional projects. We also adopted several concept documents aimed to establish the development framework for new net zero sectors, namely the hydrogen industry and electric transport. All these documents comprise the first national climate package that is essentially the first practical step to implement our low-emission development strategy. The primary goal we set in the strategy is to ensure economic growth in the face of the global energy transitions. To achieve this goal, we should both tackle new challenges and seize new opportunities offered by decarbonization. That's why our strategy not only sets a goal, but also lays out an implementation plan. We consider two scenarios in the strategy: business as usual and intensive action. Business as usual does not imply any additional efforts, while intensive action implies active decarbonization measures. The one we set as a target scenario is intensive action because it better meets the national priorities. By 2030, implementing intensive decarbonization measures and enabling emission reduction and removal projects will allow us to decrease the carbon intensity for our economy at a faster rate. After 2030, these efforts will promote structural economic shifts while maintaining stable GDP growth rate, at least 3% per year. In particular, we expect our export to become more competitive. This will allow us to secure enough fiscal space to implement active social policies and keep the high level of the real income of the population. We also expect the structure of the economy to become post-industrial and economic growth more decoupled from emissions. Decarbonization measures will compensate the increase in emission. Their total effect by 2050 in decrease in emission up to 300 million tons. To ensure decarbonization, we plan to rebalance the energy mix in favor of zero and low emissions nuclear energy and renewables. Russia is actively replacing the obsolete energy generation infrastructure and launching new low emissions capacities. Among these efforts are government support for the localization of renewables as well as R&D in nuclear technologies with a lower carbon footprint than renewables. By 2050, we expect a 1.6-fold increase in gross national electricity generation. With the share of zero and low emissions energy sources rising from 40 to 54%. We also plan to increase steam and cogeneration capacities, decrease associated natural gas leakage, modernize the gas transportation system, and develop electric and gas engine transport. What's also important is to introduce best available technologies in industry, as well as raise the efficiency of heat and cold supply and build new buildings with high energy efficiency standards in construction, housing, and public utilities. At the same time, we pay special attention to protecting and improving the quality of natural sinks of greenhouse gas, especially forests. The importance of these efforts is highlighted in Article 5 of the Paris Agreement. We take it rather conservatively. We expect to maintain the current level of removals capacity, and we plan to further increase by introducing additional measures. In total, we expect 1.2 billion tons. Preliminary calculations shows that the potential removals capacity can reach an unprecedented 2 or maybe 2.5 billion tons of CO2 equivalent per year due to additional measures to protect natural ecosystems. Russia has also a significant potential in the use of technologies for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Russian companies are already designing and testing solutions in this area. Implementing measures to decarbonize the economy will allow us to reduce net emissions by 80 percent of 1990 level by 2050 and provide by carbon neutrality by 2060. A key question policymakers around the world should answer is who will pay for decarbonization. To this end, it's crucial to ensure sustainable development in the long term. As we witness in European energy market this year, aggressive decarbonization measures require additional investment. We also see risks for many countries. Some of them may face a rise in energy prices, others decline in energy exports, others just started the process of industrialization. The answer we have is making decarbonization a rational development and not an emotional one. We are looking for the balance between our international commitments and domestic obligations to citizens and businesses. In this regard, this year we did our best to optimize costs to implement the strategy by half. This is very important because eventually the consumer has to pay for decarbonization. We believe that our relevant options to reduce costs are expanding international climate change cooperation and enabling free movement of investment in sectoral technologies and projects aligned with the most effective emissions reduction. To conclude, we believe that the above-mentioned measures will allow us to reduce the energy intensity of our economy by 2 times and its carbon intensity by 6 times, as well as achieve both national emissions reduction goals and ultimately carbon neutrality by 2060. Russia is open for cooperation on the climate agenda. We would positively respond to any constructive ideas. Thank you for your attention.
Спасибо большое, Максим Геннадьевич, что взяли на себя.
Thank you so much, dear Maxim. Thank you for taking the role, presenting briefly all this great job, what is done in the Russian Federation, which we're planning to pursue in the Russian government, and already presented the attendees our strategy, social economic development, also our strategy 2050, in the low carbon emissions conditions. For sure, we make a lot of different things, and the most important and the final result the strategy is aiming, we should keep the balance between the reduction of emissions, the increase of absorption capacity of our ecosystems, and at the same time we don't want to allow decreasing the life people of our people and also providing the economic growth. That's why this balance is very important. It's very important not only for Russia but all for other countries, and we hear everywhere during the conference the importance of this topic. That's why these measures which aim resolving climate problems should be considered by all of us as a opportunity, possible to achieve a new development level. In order to resolve this task, we should also remember our ecosystems. As far as you know, the Russian Federation is the biggest on the territory point of view, biggest country in the world. That's why we assume a specific responsibility in this sphere, speaking about the managing of our ecosystems. 20% of the forests are located in our country, in the Russian Federation. That's why now I'd like to ask Deputy Minister of Natural Resources and Ecology, Mr. Anaprienko, detailing what is the role played by our forest in the transition, in this green transition, and how we consider this possibility and how we deal our ecosystem.
Сказано, Российская Федерация – это более...
Thank you very much. Just as it was said before, Russia has more than 20% of the global forest. And it is very heartwarming that it is for the first time that it is that the international negotiations on climate, such a great attention is being dedicated.
Presentations. Is there a way to make the PowerPoint presentation going?
А?
Slide another slide.
You have to turn the slides because we have the presentations. So I will continue. As I have already said, it is very important for Russia. 1,246 hectares of forest and 815 million hectares is covered by forests in Russia. As for carbon, that's a bit more than 12% of carbon storage in the world. As a part of our state forest policy, we consistently and systematically do everything to protect, do afforestation and reforestation. This year, we have adopted a strategy responsible not only for forestry, but also for forest industry. For the third year in a row, we have a national project preserving the forests as a part of National Project Environment, and since 2014, we're implementing the state program Development of Forestry. It is our task, in order to achieve the national development goals by 2024, is to ensure 100% of balance between decommissioning and reproduction of the forest. So for every dead tree or the tree that burned down, that was cut down, there should be a new tree, equal in quality. President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has achieved the goal to achieve carbon neutrality no later than 2060. And that has been reflected in the strategy adopted in October 2021, Low Carbon Development Strategy for Russia till 2050. I think that this goal is quite attainable considering the maximum absorption capacity of forests and other ecosystems. This strategy foresees growing potential for absorption capacity till 2050 almost by 200%, so 1.2 billion tons of CO2 equivalents. In order to achieve that, we need to do the following. Naturally, the scourge of today's, that's forest fires, wildfires, also protecting pests, forests from diseases and pests, afforestation and reforestation, increasing forest productivity due to new, innovative, intensive forestry practices. Besides, the Russian business will be capable of doing climate projects aimed at absorbing greenhouse gas emissions. For that, we have all the necessary laws and regulations in place. Such projects are aimed at development of the carbon market and growing investment in forestry. In the end, I'd like to say that we have supported Glasgow Declaration on Forests and Land Use. It is absolutely in line with our national goals, and that significant work that's being done to improve the environmental situation in Russia. I'm confident that Glasgow Declaration will give a new impetus to further international cooperation on forests and sustainable management of forests, as well as to increase the priority of the forest issues in general on the UN agenda on SDGs. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Minister Inoprienko. Russia is not only a major forest power, it is also a major energy power. So right now, I'd like to move on to the energy matters. This industry naturally is a reason for many arguments on the topic of climate. If we're taking at the energy mix of the Russian Federation, then it could be considered as, quite justly so, as one of the lowest emissions energy mixes. That is indeed so. and largely, to a major extent, thanks to nuclear power energy. This is modern, clean, and safe type of energy. Our take on the nuclear input in the low carbon development of our country will be covered by the CEO of Rosatom, Russian Nuclear Power Corporation, Mr. Likachov. Please do not forget to turn the slides. Don't forget to press the button. Thank you so much. Thank you for the instructions and for giving me the floor. I'll try to do everything in my power. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I think I'll start with the most important thing. COP26. As one of the results, I think, is that it ended the discussion whether we need the nuclear energy in the global energy mix. I think the answer is yes, we need nuclear energy. And we heard that at this COP26. And that was the answer in the spirit of the declarations of leaders and in the news coverage that we see right now and we continue to follow on this major global event. Naturally, what types of nuclear power generation, the development of technologies, we still are to take stock of that in the future, and we're doing that. But I think that we can divide the history of nuclear energy pre-COP26 and post-COP26. With this discussion, for the majority of the participants of the conference, came to a positive answer that we do need nuclear energy. And there are several reasons behind that. It's quite clear that it has to do with the energy transition and carbon transition. We've heard many evaluations by European institutions, by Energy Commission of the UN, by the EU Commission. In any case, in power generation, nuclear has zero emissions. As for the vital cycle of the certain project, nuclear shares the first place for being the cleanest with solar and wind energy regarding the carbon footprint. So this conclusion that has been made by different scientists on different continents is apparent right now, I think. And in that sense, it is impossible not to consider nuclear energy in the global energy mix as a real tool to achieve carbon goals. At the same time, I'd like to highlight that Russia is leading by example here. Right now, the Russian Federation, as the outcome of last year, as for power generation, 20.3% has been the share of nuclear power stations, and the president has made the decision to increase that by up to 25%, so 1/4 in our energy mix, in the power energy mix of Russia. That will be achieved through nuclear power generation. Besides that, the direct carbon footprint, there are also other important metrics. Energy intensity, if we're taking a look at installation at NPPs, it's 13 times lower than wind parks. As for territory dedicated to NPPs, it requires 34% less territories than the same wind stations. We do not support competition between different types of green power generation, and we actually also invest into wind parks, and we are owners of the largest parks in Russia. But still, we see that solar, nuclear, hydro, and wind generation, if we take a look at all of them, they're all of them that are the answer to the challenges that the Russian Federation is facing. But without further development, without innovation in nuclear, we cannot see the future in Russia or in the world. And we're thinking, what are the drivers behind innovations? That's nuclear. We're looking at closed nuclear fuel cycle. It would help us increase by 100 times, and I'm not exaggerating that. We can increase our fuel base through recycling the fuel of the spent fuel. And that is a fundamental breakthrough. So when the fuel has been spent, it does not turn into waste. It becomes the fuel for fast neutron reactors. These are not just empty words. Sometimes the word breakthrough is a major step forward. That's actually the name of our project. It's called Breakthrough. We have achieved the results in the city of Seversk. And by 2025, we'll have the first fourth generation reactor using this closed nuclear fuel cycle. At the same time, all innovations that have to do with small power generation and floating and land-based solutions for small and medium generation, we actually have a long portfolio of orders on those. I cannot help but highlight that there are important topics that have to do with low carbon hydrogen that are on the agenda on global energy and for Rosatom as well. Strictly speaking, we do not just get green carbon. We actually can accumulate nuclear energy and turn that from grids, and we can store that, actually solving the issues with power supply for faraway territories. So we're solving hydrogen storage issues and long-distance power generation. Well, here with the Vice Prime Minister and Minister of the Russian Federation, I'll try to say this Russian saying, which can be roughly translated as you have to challenge yourself. And Rosatom challenges itself that we're actively working on waste category 1 and category 2. We're developing Northern Sea route, and we're doing a lot of very useful tasks using our amazing potential of nuclear. Naturally, nuclear industry has its own specifics and challenges. It requires a certain level of knowledge. There are scientific dynasties, actually, and also the concentration of brain power. And there are 26 cities in Russia that we're calling nuclear cities. So we have a specific human resources policy. For us, staff decides everything. We have high-level employees in organizations and employees that know how to work with the uncertainty of today's time. So this is the work that we're doing. We're building our corporate culture with human-centric culture, how to train our specialists, how to tap into the potential of our human capital. That's the reason why Rosatom continues to be the leader in skills and in world skills high tech. This year we have also won the most golden medals at for the national team of Russia at this world skills competition. And by the assessment of Headhunter, Russian HR website, we are one of the best employers in Russia. And circling back to the beginning, we are a part of the global community. I'd like to highlight once again that at COP26 we have agreed with IAEA and World Nuclear Association, as well as OECD, Nuclear Agency, our partners from France, UK, and Hungary. We have agreed to coordinate our positions here, and we'll try to guard our interests regarding our positions and ideas. I'd like to thank all our partners from international organizations and national nuclear industries. I'd like to thank them for that coordinated position that I've shown at COP26. I'm positive that tomorrow's COP27 will begin next week. At least we in our community will be taking stock next week of this conference and will be preparing for the next one. As it was said back in the Soviet times, I'd like to assure the government and the leaders of the state that Rosatom is prepared to do in its humble part to extend the agenda of the Russian Federation. And we'd truly like to highlight the great attention that was shown to our professional agenda, the global nuclear agenda, throughout the whole COP26, as well as during the work of our delegation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Likachov, for your very detailed explanation about Rosatom approaching the climate agenda. Naturally, nuclear industry has a major plus. It can ensure non-intermittent, reliable and safe power supply for the end user. Indeed, you're one of the cleanest sources of energy, and Rosatom on its own is an amazing company. It's working not only in the energy sector, but it also is doing a lot of things and solving different issues for the humanity. The world cannot be imagined without nuclear technology. Sometimes in our daily lives, we do not even understand what kind of a role is being played by nuclear in daily lives of people. Of course, we have to understand that the green transition has an impact on absolutely all spheres of life. And for those tremendous projects that both businesses and states have to be implemented and carried out, for that, we need finance. That's just the way the world is. And the necessary investment means that the financial framework should be in place for the financial system to be oriented towards green investments, towards green development. COP26 is dedicating a lot of attention to this topic. Naturally, we're also talking about financial access, and when we're solving climate issues of raising temperatures, there should be no restrictions in place. And those who restrict access to climate finance are actually endangering humanity. So what we'd like to do is to have no restrictions on climate finance, especially for green projects. Herman Graf, and I see that he's online, at least I see the monitor with his face. Well, no, actually, I don't see his face. There is just the sound. The chair of the board of directors of Sberbank, and he will talk about the initiatives by our largest bank today regarding support of green development and green finance. Mr. Graf, if you can hear us, please, you have the floor. No, no go. I just see the green light that there is sound. And he's supposed to hear us, right? I'd like to ask a question to the representative for Rosatom. Hold on, we have speakers on the list and then we'll have Q&A session. Okay, if we don't have Mr. Graf, I think there are some issues with a connection, I guess.
Communications, because apparently Mr. Griff is not online, and the screen here is green. So let's try and do something. And while we're doing this, я бы попросил.
I'd like to ask our next speaker on the list, Mr. Solomin, CEO of EN Plus Group. He's also a representative of the energy industry.
Говорим, он никогда не совершил.
In any case, all the economy branches in the industry should be involved, which were considered as carbon intensive. That's why how they can evolve and how are they transformed and how do they plan to expect to achieve the climate goals everybody is waiting from them. I'll try to make my presentation in English, if you don't mind.
To speak here and to tell you about the case we had at N+. N+ is not just the power company. It's a vertically integrated power company with aluminum production. In fact, we are the #1 aluminum producer outside of China. Before China develops as much as they did, we were #1 aluminum producer in the world. And just because we are a global company, we have to look not only in Russia, we have to monitor what's happening in other parts of the world. And as you all heard on this forum, everybody is concerned with the gas emissions, and everybody introduced their own zero carbon strategy, extraction to 2030, 2050, and so we did. And you can see a lot of industries took their strategies, and they all pretty much aim to reduce the emissions to zero, well below the levels which they would have economically, which is a punctual line on this slide. And going back, what the future may look like, well, so far there is no consensus. Before this year, there was impression that it will be totally green scenario. But now what we can see, in addition to renewable power from what is considered classic renewable power, we see the increased role of nuclear power. And we think that element will replace fossil fuel in majority of the countries. And the transition that we're experiencing in the world basically means that the amount of renewable power and total electrification of the world will increase by several times by 2050. And that means all kinds of renewable powers will be in demand globally. And you can see what's happening is, just because the technology develops so much, the cost of new built power plants, renewable power plants, is pretty much comparable to to the cost of electricity produced by coal-fired power plants, say in Australia, which has one of the cheapest coal source in the world. So that means for our company, which is basically the smelters, aluminum smelters powered by power in Siberia, we see the competition, increased competition from other companies in our sector. They were previously producing aluminum, say, in the Gulf region, based on gas-fired power plants. But now, what you can see, they are partially switching to solar power. So you have solar power smelters. And introducing the hydrogen in the solution too, to replace the residual natural gas. So that, with the cost you can see, that constitutes a lot of competition to us, which previously we were basically enjoying the benefit of hydropower built in Siberia. And what's important, we think it's, especially for us, because we sell the majority of our product to other markets rather than Russia, there is a market pool. So the customers, the end users of the aluminum are requiring low carbon products. And in that turn, their customers, like the buyers of cars and the cans for soft drinks, they are requiring recyclable and low carbon product. So that goes back to us through the whole value chain. So we look at the mining, we look at the producing the alumina, we look at the smelters, through the whole value chain. And we set our targets by 2050 to become net zero in terms of carbon, and by 2030 reduce the emissions by 35%. And we already have progressed along this way. We have a special brand of aluminum called Allow, low carbon aluminum. And also, in addition to that, we're introducing we're planning to have a wide-scale recycling program to enhance this brand. And there are various challenges that we are facing. Essentially, as I said, everybody is pretty much going this way. So in steel industry, in aluminum industry, in other industries. And we have to be intact. And because of the energy transition, it's sort of a self-propelling mechanism. So energy transition requires, say, more aluminum. And more aluminum requires more renewable power. And then go circles and circles. And in essence, the cost of production in many industries increases. So we always have to look at keeping our competitive advantage over other companies just due to our vertical integration. But just because the renewable power gets cheaper every day, so that gets harder every day too. And also I would like to mention that we see one of the largest impacts from China, especially on our company. So China is getting more concerned with using the low carbon aluminum too. They've been stopping all the aluminum smelters. They've been shutting down the coal-fired plants. And we see, which we didn't see before, the increase of aluminum sales to China, which so far Chinese cannot produce enough for them of low carbon aluminum. So that represents the unique opportunity to us. And just to repeat, yes, there is new opportunity in the hydrogen. It's a great source of energy. And, but there are some issues in transportation. I'll talk about it a bit later. And as I said, we draw the plan to 2050. And you can see we basically go to zero, and we introduce all kinds of measures we can imagine. We change the technology, we change our source base, we do forest projects just to compensate whatever we cannot abate otherwise. We develop new renewable sources, hydro, and we are planning to go into more in various kind of regions. So that effectively brings us to our target and makes us more competitive compared to even in shorter term. And just to give you an example, like one of the first things we plan to do, we are going to switch from all the technology that some of our plants are using to invest approximately $5 billion in that over the next few years. And that would cut our emissions by far just for that. And after that, what we're going to do, that's the first step. Second, we are going to roll out our innovative R&D technology called inert anode. Basically, it's the metal anode replacing the carbon anode so it doesn't burn and emits CO2. It emits pure oxygen instead. So that's the next step. After that, we're going to employ more technologies. And just because we have facilities in other places, say we have the aluminum refinery in Ireland, so that could be powered by, even though it requires a lot of steam, it could be powered by the wind generation in Ireland. Or our facility in Siberia, which currently is powered by coal, so that could be, hopefully, if there is natural gas, will be switched to gas and later to hydrogen. And in our power segment, we also look in what business opportunities this transition gives to us. Well, first, we are going to increase our capacities in renewables. And just because there is not always a match where the demand is and where the capacity is. So the hydrogen represents great opportunity to store the energy and transport it elsewhere. Otherwise, sometimes it's not feasible to build the power line, but hydrogen allows us to transport this energy. And just because there are so many issues in doing that, and people are talking about the ammonia projects, there is a methanol project, various types of what we can do. We also decided to participate, and we have an alloy which is particularly resilient to the influence of hydrogen on material. And we plan to develop the 40-feet container to transport liquefied hydrogen, and which can keep it for like 45 days. That would allow to distribute hydrogen to local end users and potentially move it on ships. So it will be universal to transporting it by ships, by railway, and by cars. So that could give us some universal exposure, and to use that technology here and on other markets. And also, it's important to say that we also care about the places where we operate. So one of these, some cities where we operate, they are not enjoying great ecological situation due to emissions, due to their geographical position. And we think it will be very wise to create local clusters of local use of hydrogen, say in public transportation. And to do that, we're planning to switch our own fleet of buses to hydrogen, then to propose to local government to participate in this project, so to improve the quality of life. So we see there is no decision to be made whether to move along this pathway. I mean, all the decisions are already made, and it's just the way we have to select the ways to make this transition, not to harm ourselves. And that's what we're doing, and we're thinking about it every day. Thank you.
Вячеслав Алексеевич, большое спасибо за ваш...
Dear Alexey Vyacheslav, thank you so much for your very interesting presentation. And you showed one more time that one of the biggest company to be considered as power intensive thinks also how to switch to pure technologies. But also I think the fact that you are working and also on the hydrogen transportation storage system up to its delivery towards end users, I think that the switch to the pure energy sources will require new supply chains to be implemented, new process chains, and the fact that your company, you are thinking about this, resolving this task, and it inspires more optimism in attendees. And we hope that it will success. And but I hope still hearing and watching Herman Gref, but my screen just in front of me tells me that he is not online. I would like to hear Herman Gref, as I know his presentation, as any project should be provided just only with the financial support. As Herman Gref would like to present new financial tools by Sberbank, offered by Sberbank. That's why I think that the Herman Gref is the only single person who is able to present in details this project and these tools, as he's a very famous person who is able to provide and to share the auditorium with his thoughts. And during the previous cooperation of our mutual work, I saw how he inspired people and guiding them, resolving tasks which considered not to be resolved, as he has this capacity. But unfortunately for this moment, if I understand, his team is trying to resolve the communication issue, but for the moment due to this break, listening to Maxim Reshetnikov, it was pity for him a little bit, as he had really a task not to end using a really teletype method to present in details of what is happening. And when he heard just a single proposal and firstly, and at the next stage, he switched to totally another topic. But beside the fact that each of these thoughts can be detailed by specific presentation, as all these initiatives are supported by our roadmaps, as we are dealing in the Russian government actively, and our ministries have a big discussion about all these topics. That's why, if you don't mind, dear Maxim, speaking about these specific topics, could you detail, for example, the transition project, as you mentioned, taxonomy of green project? What is the specific feature? How does it look like? As we're hearing a real beautiful word, but what it means. This year we saw a number of projects. I'm speaking about the taxonomy for ESG projects introduced. I'm speaking about environmental green projects, which relates firstly to the CO2 reduction. And for us, the main experience was the fact that it was not our own initiative. It was an initiative provided by the business community, Sberbank, Gazprom Bank, big exporting companies like EN Plus company, Rosatom was involved also in this work, as our working group included more than 50 representatives of different companies. And during all these discussions, we created the taxonomy, which includes the best Western practices, speaking about the green project. And as of today, there was a new innovation. That's why, speaking about low carbon project and also green projects, we included to this project also nuclear energy. That's why our taxonomy is really confirmed by international community, and recently the standard developers confirmed that this is a right taxonomy. But at the same time, we understood that we include only all the things that can be included according to the Western European standards, there is at the same time a number of projects related to the hydro energy, nuclear energy, gas recycling, coal recycling. Perhaps they are not so green, but they're also important for our economy, but they reduce considerably the emissions. That's why we identified the transition period for these projects, where we included all the things related to the gas capture during the energy generation and the best technologies TLB, which provide more than 20% in efficiency in the gas extraction, coal recycling, etc. And it helps us going forward. And now we are at the crossroads, as we made a taxonomy which is really required by big companies. The main question, should we support in addition in the introduction of this project, or now the business community is rather mature to implement in the autonomous way this project? As for me personally, I think it's really required. There is a demand. Perhaps for the moment we don't need any additional tools by my colleagues from my ministry. We think that for a moment we should motivate, provide together with the Russian Central Bank and other ministries. But in any case, speaking about the additional stimulus, motivating factors, we see that new projects appear, the taxonomy and the regions provide stocks and big companies. I think that this is one of the bullets, as you said before, which is really implemented. And I'd like to stress one more time that the specific feature of this project, and as a number of others, our government is working tens of ministries which cooperate between themselves, including Russian Central Bank and also business community, which includes the bank society and real sector, state corporations. We can say that some kind of systemic movement in our country, which for the last perhaps I will discover a little bit our internal kitchen when we prepared for the Glasgow conference.
When we were preparing for Glasgow, one of the questions we had is how ambitious are we in our commitments? Indeed, there were a lot of debates on that topic. We have gathered multiple times together to discuss it. So, as a person who was aggregating all positions when we were developing the strategy, what can you say? Well, maybe we shouldn't ask you about it, but still, as a Minister for Economic Development, how ambitious did we manage to be? Well, you know, maybe I'm afraid of sounding blunt, but I think ambitiousness in our climate agenda, I think we have plenty. But not everyone knows how to implement that ambition later. So what we did is we made an emphasis on both ambitions and responsibility. So yes, maybe there are questions, why 2060? That doesn't sound good and that doesn't sound ambitious. We did all the calculations, we did all the economic calculations, we understand the capacity of our economy. We know that we should not achieve carbon neutrality at any price, because every carbon neutrality would come at a price. We have to understand it. Any kind of investment are actually paid for by the user. In the end, we're trying to strike a balance, and our president tried to direct us towards that. We have to ensure growing economy and growing livelihoods of our citizens. That was utmost priority when we're trying to solve the task of cutting down emissions and giving an adequate Russian impact to the global economy. And actually, I can say that Russia has already made its greatest input. Considering our responsibility and accountability in achieving the goals that we proclaim, we have a very ambitious goal, because we know how much we will have to do to achieve that. But that's a responsible goal. And we call upon all our partners and other countries to be as transparent as possible when they talk not only about goals, but also instruments and methods of achieving those goals. And most importantly, colleagues have to understand who will pay for it and how much. When we meet with representatives of other countries, not all of them, actually, very few of them can give us a detailed answer to that. Thank you, Minister Reshetnikov. Indeed, the key here is transparency, accountability, and everyone has to understand what's happening, what kind of efforts are being made by the countries to implement climate agenda, and the commitments that everyone has taken upon themselves. If we talk about Mr. Onoprienko's statement, I think there are two interesting points here. First of all, what's already is a Glasgow result. That's the Glasgow Declaration on Forestry and Land Use. I think it would give an impetus to international cooperation in this sphere. And I think there is great potential in there for the Russian input in this global work. In your statement, you mentioned a very close date, that's 2024. So in 2024, ensuring 100% of balance of decommissioning and reproduction of forests, that is the goal that is to be achieved. When a public servant speaks on that, he usually says these general phrases, but what do you plan to do specifically? It's hard to make people aware of what the government is actually doing, so if you could please. We're working within the federal project of preserving forests for 3 years. And as for federal budget allocations by 2024, they will exceed 40 billion rubles. So what are the aspects? First of all, technical refurbishment of our forestry points. All regions of the Russian Federation are refurbishing wildfire prevention equipment. These are tens of thousands of technical equipment. And that gives us result. And what do we see as a result? Naturally, we do have wildfires, and we're going through a fire peak, and we're starting this 5-year cycle with very serious wildfires, and we see that in other countries as well, actually. The medium square footage of fires due to the refurbishment of our equipment has decreased. What does it mean? We see and respond to wildfires faster. Naturally, the weather and the climate change are dictating their own rules. And the wildfires have gone beyond the Arctic Circle. If 5 years ago, the Chukotka fire, or in the north of Yakutia, in the tundra, the fires were unimaginable there. Now it becomes almost a norm. If I'm right, I think last year and this year, Chukotka region and Yakutia experienced the temperatures of plus 38, and it came as no surprise to people. That's beyond the Arctic Circle. Yes, beyond. The snow is burning, basically. I think this phrase will be the motto of and the outcome of our meeting. So, besides technical refurbishment, we're also taking measures to do reforestation, millions of hectares, artificial and combined methods. About 750,000 saplings are being produced by the nurseries, and they're being planted. Russian Federation, besides state measures, also has volunteers who are planting more than 30 million trees. For example, Gardens of Memory. We had a project to plant a tree per every dead warrior in the Second World War, but now this has turned into an annual campaign. In the fall, we plant 40 million trees as an annual campaign. Usually people ask about fires. People play with figures and trying to interpret statistics, how many hectares burned down, so people focus on certain facts. So this year, the territory of the fires was about 10 million hectares, the distance that was covered by the fire. That's more than last year. But what I would like to highlight here, that it's the distance traveled by the fire. It doesn't mean that this square footage burned down. You know, you count chickens when they hatch. So we'll take stock of the Federation at a later date. We understand that in the spring, when the snow cover goes down, there is dry shrub underneath, and the earth is dry. And when the wildfire happens then it's just the shrub that burns down. So when the forest burns down, we can say that the wildfire that travels very fast, and then the wood burns down. So last year, square footage stood at 9 million. So the amount of forest that burned down, 160,000 hectares of forest. And this data is being annually verified by the regions of the Russian Federation. Every region submits their own registries. As for the Declaration of Glasgow on forests and land use, naturally we welcome that. It's the first time that such great attention is dedicated on forest agenda. And the Logic is simple, just like Canada, Nordic countries, the US, they have great forest coverage. We have a lot of square footage of forest. Not many countries. Well, there are countries with tropical forests, but boreal forests have very specific qualities. And what we could do, we could concentrate on scientific and methodological research basics to understand what's the capacity for boreal forests. We can do a lot here. Naturally, the pandemic made its own adjustments to our context with organizations in the US and Canada, but I'm positive that after this declaration, all countries with boreal forests will join efforts and will raise this issue at the UN as well. Russia is actively engaging with these processes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Onoprenko. What you said, the figures that you gave, they testify to our transparency and openness. Well, we don't hide these facts. And it means that we are prepared to work with a global community, with an expert community, to solve these issues. Thank you very much for the work that you're doing. Mr. Likachov, in the end of your statement, you said that starting with the next week, you'll start preparing for COP27. What did you mean? What I meant was that we need to take stock of the outcomes of COP26 not only on our dedicated topic on nuclear energy, but in general. Well, look, what's important here? Quite often, when we talk about the energy transition, we mainly mean in our discussions, we're talking about power generation, but apparently this matter is much wider. For example, if we're talking about increasing power generation from 20 to 25% by nuclear, that's a part of the response how to move forward. But as for thermal generation, as for transportation, industry, as for their carbon footprint, we have not yet have been truly made aware of that. And second thing that's also important, look, in COP26 there was a certain political discussion, debate that took place. It's apparent, we see that unfortunately there is political jaundice here as well. But what I would like to have is that great cooperation that we had on nuclear agenda with our foreign partners, we'd like to have that more in practical cooperation, to have less of political in it. It is impossible to solve the energy transition, an environmental breakthrough in those political coordinates that the world has been living for the past few years. It is so apparent. It's our common cause, but we'll have to abandon certain things, abandon very apparent politicization. I think we'll have to abandon also sort of very primitive understanding of energy transition as just switching a tumbler, switching a lever from non-green to green. There is no just this switch that you can switch. We need great economic calculations and understanding how many years it would take and how much money it would take to create the necessary capacity. Unfortunately, we're not having this discussion. We need to initiate that actually. Yes, and not only on power generation, but in general on energy consumption on the planet. Third thing, we need to abandon certain this caveman nuclear phobia, for example. And we need to make the international community aware of the solutions of the 4.0 generation of nuclear technology. Look at the expansion of the countries who have nuclear capacities. In the 40s and 50s and the 60s of the past century, that was an elite club. At the break of the century, the community was a little wider, but now we have very different countries Bangladesh, Egypt, Turkey. They're building major NPPs, and many of them want to have small nuclear power stations. So just to make a resume of sorry if I went on for too long. So to take resume, I think we really care about the outcomes, but these are not so much results, but something to think about. And as a takeaway, actually, well, we liked everything, but as just a next step. But you know, the king is dead, long live the king. So with the next week, we'll start preparation for the next COP27. Thank you very much, Mr. Likachev. I know your approach, so I know you're very dedicated. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and organizers are giving us just the final few minutes to take stock of that. But what we're trying to present here, and I hope we brought it to you, is a message that we're working very seriously on climate issues in our country. Unfortunately, it may be not so widely known around the world, but we'll try to get this message across to the international community for everyone to see that we're ambitious, that we want to work together with the whole planet, because there are no borders here. Climate recognizes no borders. Indeed, only through collective efforts of all the countries in the world that we can solve this issue. It is truly one of the defining defining moments of our life, and many things might happen on our planet that we would not like to see. That's why we're all here in Glasgow today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.